Afternoon. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar, Lessons Learned, Tips for Making Your Mold and Moisture Response More Sound and Defensible. Today's presenter is FACS's very own Chief Science Officer, Ben Kollmeyer. Ben has over 25 years of experience in the environmental health field, having conducted numerous investigations involving a wide range of physical, chemical, and biological hazards in both occupational and community settings. He regularly consults for public and private sector clients, performing field investigations and developing prevention and management programs. With a background that includes work on several large and high-profile building investigations, Ben is often called upon as an expert witness and to lead risk communication efforts with diverse stakeholder groups. As the Chief Science Officer at FACS, he provides strategic guidance on emerging environmental health issues. Now, before we begin, we're going to head into one last point of emphasis, which is on our GoToWebinar platform. As you can see, you are on listen-only mode. So that does not mean you can't communicate with us. In the top right, you should see a little question box. So at any point throughout the presentation, if you have a question you'd like to ask, feel free to put it in there, and our team will be able to compile them. And at the end, during our Q&A session, we should be able to get to all of them. But if we can't get to all of them today, we will for sure follow up with emails after the fact. And now that my turn is done, Ben, take it away.
Thank you, Sam, and welcome everyone. As the title implies, we're going to go through some of the lessons learned and experiences to help do a better job on our mold and moisture responses, kind of make them more sound, less pitfalls, and more defensible at the end of the day if you need it. So to do that, our agenda, I'm going to run through a quick review of the mold and moisture science, the background that we're going to be talking about here, just kind of get our heads in the game on some of the issues that we're looking at. And then I'm going to kind of talk about some different tips for success and practice pointers, really divided into three sections. We're going to talk about what you do proactively before you have an incident, what do you do when you're kind of in the mix on things, and what do you do on the back end after the incident. Now, what presentation would be complete without some form of disclaimer here on it? So I will tell you, the disclaimers here is that this is not intended to be a comprehensive review. We're going to kind of get to some of the key issues. So this isn't a soup to nuts on how to do mold investigations or remediation. And also, this is from my perspective as an environmental health consultant, working on day-to-day problem solving, some expert witness work, and kind of what we see out there in terms of being able to get a good record and get things done the right way. So it's not legal advice. There's other dynamics that come into play, risk management choices. This is just how we see it as hygienists when we're dealing with it. So without further ado, let's jump right in with a little mold and moisture 101 to understand a little bit about what we're talking about here. So mold growth. Mold needs a lot of things to grow. Most of those are readily available. So there's really two things that we look for in the built environment that addresses mold growth. That control mold growth, or they're the factors that kind of limit if it's going to occur, if it's not going to occur. That is the presence of moisture on organic building materials. So most commonly, this is drywall paper. A little bit longer time, moisture on wood can result in it, on organic dust, on wallpaper. It can happen on carpet, but it's not going to happen on stone or concrete, although it can happen on dust and dirt that gathers on stone and concrete, or organic material that gathers in the grout of a shower, for example. So when it comes down to looking and controlling and responding to mold problems in buildings, we're looking for where did the water go and where did it impact organic materials, and usually organic building materials. When you have mold growth occurring, there's a lot of different little bits and pieces and things going on. There's the mold spores, which are something we sample for and look at quite a bit, and how we identify the different types. There's, if you think of them as a dandelion, the spores are the white fuzzy thing. There's hyphofragments, or pieces of the stem. In these structures, in the hyphae and in the spores, there's allergens in the cell wall structures that can cause allergic reactions to people. As mold takes in water, gives up water, and dries out, and digests its food, it can release gases that we recognize as musty odors. And you might hear a lot about toxic compounds that can be generated by molds as they go through their cycle, called mycotoxins, that sometimes they generate, sometimes they don't, depending on their environmental conditions. So all of these things are kind of in the mix when you got mold growth occurring. The spores are floating, spores can be floating around, and these different components are there. So armed with that knowledge, I'll give you your first quiz. Organic building materials, moisture. Use that to your clue and look at this picture and say, hey, I see this on the wall. Sure looks like mold growth. Is it mold growth? Give you a second to think about that. In this case, we don't really have an organic substrate. That brick doesn't look too dirty, shouldn't be supporting much of mold growth. What we have here is actually not mold, but efflorescence, or water coming through a brick wall and evaporating and leaving the salts behind that forms these crystal structures. So illustrating the point that armed with that knowledge of what it takes to grow mold, it can help us kind of diagnose situations and figure things out. I talked about the dandelion effect here with aspergillus under our electron microscope picture. You can really get a sense of that, dandelion, little spores are all little balls there, and the stem there, that'd be the hyphae, which break up into small pieces themselves. And on the right is another kind of mold, Stachybotrys, tends to like a lot of moisture content, and so it's a stickier, slimier kind of mold that's kind of comes into the game a little bit later. And as you can see, its spores it kind of holds onto a little bit tighter. So the different spores, they each have their own personality and characteristics. You don't need to worry about that too much. That's our job as mold professionals to understand some of those dynamics. But that gives you kind of an image to put the words to here. Okay, question, is mold harmful to people? The answer is it most certainly can be. People are regularly exposed to mold at background levels. So mold spores are basically all around us all the time. I'm sure they're floating here in my office, probably in the environment you're in. And it's there and around because mold spores degrade organic material in nature. We'd be drowning in a pile of leaves if it wasn't for molds to break things down. So people are exposed to these common levels, but when we get above background, we get to very high exposures, abnormal exposures, that's when we can start to have problems. Also, when we have individuals that are more susceptible and sensitive to molds. And just like with many things, some people are allergic to things and some people are not. So some people can have very severe allergies to mold, and other people may have none. So the health effects, by far the most common and well understood and not really that much debated, is allergic type health effects, which can range from nothing to hay fever to an asthma attack, or very, very serious types of effects. There's also infectious effects of molds, which are really not debated either, that can definitely occur. Usually, this is only happening in severely immune compromised individuals, really an issue we're concerned about for healthcare. Because it's in that population group, we typically don't deal with that in our typical buildings. Although if you have an occupant or resident that is immune compromised, undergoing chemotherapy, or have other kind of disease that really weakens their immune system, that can be an issue there. And then there's the toxic effects of molds, which are probably the most debated and most controversial. There's a lot of literature around ingestion of mold can cause problems if you eat moldy stuff. That's not too debated. The effects of inhalation levels of toxins and mold spores is something that's more debated within the medical community, and what the effects of those are, and if there are any effects, if there's enough of the toxin from inhalation to cause that effect. So area of controversy, but something that brings a lot of concern and that we're talked about. The good news here is when we talk about cleaning up in mold, when we clean it up, we're cleaning up all these things. And that's the bottom line. So because of these potential health effects, mold in buildings needs to be cleaned up, needs to be addressed, and that's the bottom line on it. Okay. How do we clean it up? There's various guidance out there. Probably the most easily digestible for your typical maintenance departments and teams, in-house teams, is the EPA's mold remediation in school buildings. About, I forget the exact count, probably about a 30-page read that kind of breaks it down pretty simply for you. But to get into the nitty-gritty on it, the IICRC has two standards, S500 for professional water damage restoration and S520 for mold remediation. They get into the the nuts and bolts of how you conduct remediation, whether it's water or mold. There's other various more technical documents oriented towards the professional community as well, but these are kind of the most common ones, from the easy read to the deeper reads. And what's the basics of remediation, to kind of wrap up, or I got one more slide after this. The basics of remediation is we want to get wet materials dry. We want to disinfect if we have contaminated water. Usually that's some type of sewage, black water issue, although it can be chemical. We want to, if we have mold growth, we want to clean it up, and cleaning up mold growth is about particle removal. It's not about killing it. It's not about disinfecting it or bleaching it. It's about vacuuming up, wiping up, getting rid of the mold particles, because it's the particles, whether they're dead or alive, that have the potential to cause allergic health effects. In the process of doing this, we want to protect the workers doing the cleanup, and we want to protect the surrounding environment, including the people in it, usually with containments and such things, so we don't release a whole bunch of mold spores around during our cleanup process. And of course, the cause, what put the moisture there, if we don't fix that cause, our mold problem is going to come back. So good remediation also considers what you're going to do to address the cause. All right, so to our last slide here on the science is to kind of give us some perspective, what I call the anatomy of a mold issue, how we look at it. We have the green is kind of the chain of events. You have some type of causal condition or event that can result in moisture impact upon your building materials, which can allow for biological amplification or mold growth to occur, which may result in exposure to people or getting mold spores all over contents and things, and may make people ill if they become exposed. So that's the set of things that can happen. And our job and our response is to take care of the blue boxes, which are the places where we can intervene and short circuit that chain of events. So good prevention practices stop events from resulting in moisture impact. Good responses and emergency drying stops moisture from causing mold growth. And then if we do end up with having mold growth, doing a good job of evaluating the situation and cleanup helps us avoid the problems of exposing people and having people become ill. So that's really what we're about, is, and you as property managers and facilities owners, is to take care of those things to short circuit our chain of events that may result in people becoming ill. All right, let's get some tips, some real world things and what we're talking about. We're going to start on the front end with some of the before an incident tips. So one key thing is preventative maintenance, right? We want to be looking at the condition of our building envelopes, things like our rain gutters, our windows, to make sure the buildings don't leak to begin with. So to prevent mold problems, you have to have a good program for maintaining those building envelopes. Similarly, ventilation procedures, especially in residential settings where you have people showering, cooking, producing moisture and putting moisture into the environment. We want to make sure there's means of getting that moisture out and ventilating it out. So whether that's a fan above the stove that's exhausting, or most commonly your bathroom fans or operable windows to get the moisture out. As building owners and managers, you want to make sure that those provisions are in place and functional. And then finally is proactive inspections, because a lot of times mold develops from conditions that people aren't keeping an eye out for or aren't looking for. So if you're doing a unit turn between tenants or a routine annual inspection, looking for these signs that we're going to talk about of moisture staining and damage and following up on them, not just going into doing a typical clean and paint and move along, but take the time to look and see if there's any indications of moisture impact or damage. Open those closets that never get opened, look under things behind furniture and the like in those places, and see if you have problems developing. So just a basic proactive walkthrough inspection, looking for evidence of moisture impact or mold growth, can go a long way, because you can spot it and get on it before it gets to be a bigger problem. Also, having a good reporting and response plans. What you want to do is support rapid detection and action. So how is it that if your constituency has a moisture or mold issue, how is it getting reported to you as a person responsible for taking action on it? And what are those mechanisms? How are they tracked? The tracking is important because you don't want a complaint or something to come in and have there be a long lag before it's responded to, or have it slip through the cracks. When we see problems, that's a common allegation is, hey, we said there was water intrusion, nothing was done. And you want to, and we'll talk about getting these done in a timely manner to prevent mold growth, but having the systems and mechanisms in place to track and respond is a critical element to avoiding your problems. And it also allows you to set response expectations so that your constituencies know what's coming if they report on it. They know what to expect. It's not a mystery. They're prepared, they're informed, and they know what those mechanisms are. So all of those things, that rapid reporting and response helps avoiding those things that can cause you problems down the road. Also, before an incident, knowing what are you going to be able to handle in-house. So defining what are the in-house actions that's going to be taken. What kind of a risk assessment is going to be done? Are there situations where you're going to say, hey, these are sensitive occupants that are making XYZ allegations, therefore I'm going to go straight to an outside consultant, or we can keep this one in-house, or this is the size of something we can deal with, as opposed to it's too big of a problem, we need outside help. So knowing that process of how you assess those risks and determine how to respond, and knowing what the limits are for your in-house teams. Help them understand up front, your maintenance folks, whoever it is that's out there in your front line, is what can we handle in-house and when are we going to turn to an outside professional? So you want to train them on that, and give them the tools to do that and know when to ask for help. And oftentimes what we've had a lot of success with clients is providing common situations guidance. You know your buildings, you know your structures that you deal with, you know the recurrent issues that you have, whether it's water stains under a sink, mold growth on the ceiling above a shower. Say, hey, here's how we deal with these things. Write it out so the team knows how to respond and respond consistently to get it taken care of right. And also before an incident, setting the expectations for your outside vendors. So consultants and contractors, knowing who you're going to call beforehand, because if you have an emergency water situation, if you have people freaking out and about mold growth, you don't want to be fumbling through the yellow pages or scrambling to try to find somebody. It'd be nice to have them on speed dial, have a preset contract in place so you can get moving on it, get cranking, and get these things knocked out. So, and also when you determine and you kind of pre-qualify those consultants and contractors, it also gives you an opportunity to find out what is it that they're going to do, what are the protocols that are going to be followed. You can ensure that it's in line with those standard of care documents. And importantly, as we'll talk about in the next part here, what are they providing to you? What do you want to have? What are you paying for in that report? Or when your remediator goes out there, what kind of documentation do you want to walk away with at the end of the day? So those are important things to define, and as we go into the next thing on the response, those are the kind of things that you want to build into these preset protocols and deliverables. Okay, lastly, before an incident, and I'm going to hit on this as a theme in each phase, is the importance of communicating with our occupants, keeping everyone on the same page for getting issues identified rapidly and responded, because that's what everyone has a shared interest in, right? Our occupants want to be in a building that's free of mold growth and problems, and we want to have buildings that are free of mold growth and problems. So aligning people with reliable resources, it might be giving them information about mold growth and what to do, those response protocols, understand what to look out for, and how to report it. So giving those periodic training or informational things to people, and depending on your environment, whether that's a resident or employees, doing a little mention so that they're gonna Google, they're gonna hear about mold issues. We have an opportunity to provide them with solid, sound information proactively. And also, what are their responsibilities? Maintaining a relatively mold-free environment, because remember, mold spores are always around us. It's a team effort, right? Our maintenance folks aren't in there every day, but our occupants are. So what is it that our occupants are responsible for doing to help maintain our building? So that can be a set of protocols for workers, or for tenants. I've seen it worked into lease agreements where they say, hey, here's your responsibilities, and it informs people on how to avoid mold issues for their own benefit, and also so that you don't have to deal with responding to them, right, if we can prevent them. So getting everyone, it's basically getting everyone on the same page for maintaining a healthful environment. Setting this out as something that we want to be responsive, we want to deal with it, clearing the air on that, and getting everyone rowing the boat in the same direction. That can go a long way on avoiding those contentious situations that can develop. All right. Our next phase we want to go into, what I call being in the mix, right? When we are, this is the during phase of an incident when it comes in. So I've hit on it a couple times, is to have a rapid response, okay? There's a time window that comes into play with mold growth. Essentially, mold growth can, under the right conditions, start to develop and grow within 24 to 48 hours. And that occurs at a microscopic level. So it can happen, start to happen that quickly, typically in that kind of a window. So the rapid response is, if you get moisture impact or a flood or something that starts, you want to get in there and start drying those materials. It's an emergency response action. Let's get those things dry. Let's stop the water and respond to that immediately. Now, some things are chronic leaks. You don't find out about them over time, but you have a big flood event, you get the opportunity to get in there and get it dry. You want to move quickly. Now, that moisture stays there. There's not a lot, it's not necessarily hard and fast. There's various studies looking at different things. You can culture mold in a laboratory. Typically in like 3 to 4 days, mold can start appearing under ideal lab conditions on a growth agar. So the labs will tell us. But from various in situ studies of what's happened in the real world, or where people try to do a study on actual building materials, typically these are seeing mold show up at the soonest in the 2.5 to 3 week time frame. So again, it's not hard and fast, but by the time you're seeing those visible spots in mold growth, that means that water's typically been there for about 2.5 to 3 weeks. Is kind of the front end of that. And from there, once it starts to appear, it can grow and multiply pretty rapidly. It's kind of can be on an exponential growth curve, but that's generally the time frames we have involved. We might not find out about moisture. It may seem like a sudden event, but you may open a wall or pull out a sink to find out that there's been a slow leak that's slowly been growing and developing over time. So the purpose of our rapid response is to basically get in there and dry it out before mold develops. And we say if you delay that, then you're going to pay, right? Because it's cheaper to dry things out than to do a mold remediation, less disruptive and everything. And in terms of litigation or problems that come down the road, if you don't respond rapidly or at all, for example, then that's where greater liabilities can come into play too for folks. The main another component of what we're doing with rapid response from an occupant standpoint is we want to show our occupants that we're concerned, that we care about the environment and their health and getting things taken care of. So that rapid response conveys concern. We want to show competence, that we have a plan for what we're going to do. Going back to those response plans, we're ready to get on it. We're going to take care of it. And third, to show them action, right? So again, in maintaining good relationships with your occupants, showing that concern, competence, and action is a key part of the rapid response. We also want to find out from our occupants, it's not just what we see and know about what's happening. They're in the environment. You want to get the history from them. What have they noticed? What have they seen? What has occurred over time? They're in the environment all the time. You get that feedback from them is critical in helping investigators do their job. We want that history, and we do investigations. And as building and facilities managers, again, you need that same information to help do it right. And there's also something besides kind of the straight facts about moisture intrusion, when things appeared or started to happen or not. There's also learning what they're worried about. Remember, we want to show good faith in resolving these issues. So is there something that they're particularly concerned about that we can help provide them with information or address those concerns? You want to know what's kind of driving their concerns in this process. All right. More during an incident. Probably the most critical thing that's going to set up whether it's a successful and sound response or not is how well you follow the water. Okay, because at its heart, every mold issue is a water issue, whether that's direct leaking and impact or water vapor and condensation occurring. So we need to, when we have a mold issue or we see water, we need to follow the water from where it's coming from and where did it go. That's kind of the most simple way I can put it. So this really becomes a matter of mapping out the boundaries. A lot of times what we see in cases when we do forensic analysis is there's readings that show where things are wet, because everyone's like, oh, it's wet here, it's wet here, it's wet here. But what really becomes critical in deciding if it was a good response oftentimes is, where's that boundary? Where was it dry? So ideally, our moisture mapping says, yeah, here's where it's wet and here's the documentation of where it's dry, so we can draw that line, right? So getting that data to show when it's dry, then you kind of know you've chased it to its extent. Because if your last reading is a wet reading, the question is, well, how much further was it wet? And so you want to, ideally, you'd have, that what is not wet. And that kind of plays through too in terms of staining and damage. What is stained and damaged, what is not stained and damaged, what had mold on it, what didn't have mold on it. Oftentimes the negative findings are just as important. Also, when we're following water, it's not just about what's currently wet, right? If we have a recurrent thing or a history, we have to listen to that history, because it could be that something got wet, stayed wet for a time, grew mold, but eventually dried out. Well, we're not going to find moisture with a moisture meter there. And so we want to know, if we know something got wet, that probably is going to require some additional investigation. Similarly, even if there's no moisture, if you see staining, water-related staining or damage, that means that material was wet before. And if it was wet before, possibly on the backside of that, mold could have grown. So you want to understand not just where moisture is currently, but where's the evidence of where it was historically. And for the maintenance crews, when we look for moisture, we want to use some tools of the trade. We want to use the basic thing as a moisture meter. You can get a pin type, a surface type, and you want to use those to find moisture. You can't rely on your hand, right, to see if it feels wet, or just your eyes to see if it looks wet. So those help us find that moisture that could be there and cause mold growth, even though it may not feel or look wet. There's also infrared cameras that can, they find temperature differentials. So when things are wet, at least in a dry environment like we're at here in Southern California, a dry environment means the water's going to evaporate. Evaporating water cools surfaces. So you can see that temperature differential often. Or if it's hot water that's an issue, maybe you see temperature increase from hot water. And that kind of brings up a point that whether you're using air cameras or moisture meters, neither one of them really measure moisture, right? They measure things associated with moisture, like, cold spots on the ceiling could be missing insulation or something to that effect. If it's cold outside and missing insulation, it'd be cold. And then moisture meters, they're measuring an electronic response, conductivity, for example, in a material to determine how moisture content are approximated. So you put a moisture meter on metal, guess what? It's going to say it's saturated, because that metal is going to conduct the electricity or conduct that signal. So always know the limitations of the tools that you're using as well. And finally, as we've already iterated, when we're finding the cause, we want to track down, find, and fix the cause of the water being there. Because again, if we don't fix the cause, it could come back, and we don't want to do this twice, right? So always a key component. Okay, let's put that follow the water to a test. I got a little example here that I love that kind of illustrates how you can't just rely on where you see the mold, but think about where the moisture came from. We had a client, new construction. They had some kitchen cabinetry, and they pull out these bottom drawers, and they see visible mold growth. Back of the shelf looks like this. Okay, and they go, we got mold in this cabinet. Looks like we're going to have to tear out or clean up these cabinets, which is true. They're moldy. Okay, great. But we ask, well, why the heck are they moldy? Where did the moisture come from? Were they wet when they went in? That's one question we ask. Where could the moisture have come from? So you develop theories about that, and you start snooping around and testing and figuring out your theories. So one of the theories we had was, wait a minute, what if that moisture is coming from that concrete down below that, in the rush of construction, that cabinets get set down while that concrete is still drying and emitting moisture vapor. So we want to test this. So we find another cabinet here, no mold here, but this cabinet also has a melamine liner on the bottom, which serves as a moisture barrier. So that would trap moisture underneath that cabinet. So even though this looks fine, thinking about where did the moisture come from, following the water, we say, you know what, pull that cabinet off. And lo and behold, voila, we found more mold. So it illustrates, just because you can't see it, you got to think about where the water went, and that can lead you to where your hidden mold growth is. So you don't leave something behind that comes back to bite you down the road. Okay, a few quick hits here on things during an incident. Hidden conditions, like we just looked at, and invasive inspection. If you have staining and damage, or a known history or a theory of moisture impact upon something, then we may want to pull things apart, do invasive inspection to look and see if it's there. Of course, when you tear things apart, you want to do proper containment, because if there is a whole lot of mold growth there, you don't want to release it. So maybe you pull back a small amount, maybe with a HEPA vacuum nearby to suck up anything that's released. You don't just go rip out a bunch of drywall to see. Kind of start small. If you see a bunch of mold, you can stop, but kind of progress in a stepwise manner. Hazardous building materials. If we're going to be tearing out drywall and painted surfaces, we got to think about asbestos and lead. And this isn't a seminar on asbestos and lead. We can get our certified people in to talk about that. But the basics are pre-1978, you got to worry about that lead-based paint being present. And asbestos, even if it was recently built, a lot of our local air quality management district regulations will say that you still have to test or know positive, test or assume positive when you deal with it. And you always have to protect your workers regardless of the amount you're disturbing. So if we got residents in a structure, we want to know if there's asbestos, because we don't want asbestos claims or lead claims coming into play. So know your local regulations. It can vary by jurisdiction, and make sure you're doing the right thing and dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And know, if your building was built before 1985, it doesn't mean that you don't have to think about asbestos. It can be built in 2000 or even later, and you still have to look and consider if it's asbestos containing before you tear it apart. Other things in the area. So we may be looking at issue A for mold, but take the opportunity when your environment to see if there's other things going on. You're in that environment, it's a chance to look under sinks around common water sources to see if there's other issues that are occurring that may be confounding the issue that you're dealing with. If you're going to be doing a remediation under a window because of water intrusion, and you might be doing clearance sampling or things later, it would be good to know if there was mold in the bathroom, in the adjacent bathroom under the sink as well. So take a look at the general surrounding environment when you're addressing these. Photos are critical. At all stages of investigations, when we come back after the fact to piece together what happened, it's amazing how many times we have very little descriptive information about what was there. Say, oh, there was mold under there. Was there a little bit? Was there a lot? And different people have different ways of describing those situations. If you got pictures of the before, of the during, of the after, then that can help to tell the story of what you did and document that you were doing things the right way. Also, during an incident, staying organized, keeping a timeline of events, I think we love that forensically. We can go back and see how things progress, so we're not trying to, put Humpty Dumpty back together again without knowing what it looked like to begin with. But keeping a timeline of events helps you, one, keep things moving, dotting the I's, crossing the T's on it, so it serves that in real time to help you progress your incident, and it provides something for the record if we have to come back and look at what happened or if it was done properly. Another factor of our during an incident thing are investigation reports. So there's a lot of variability in what you can get from mold investigators and reports, a big spread in price and a big spread in quality and content. So a few things about investigative reports that we've seen come out to play to really think about. One is to read the reports when you get them. Don't just skip to the end and say, okay, is there a problem or not, right? See what they say. And if there are kind of this dueling report going on, say your residents have a mold inspection done, you have a mold inspection done, and there's two different reports, they might say two different things. And the best way I can summarize it is, it's not really about A versus B, it's about A plus B. So if you have two reports, it's not a matter of saying, oh, my report's right, yours is wrong. The truth is, in mold investigations, there can be a lot of variability in conditions, and both could be right. Both could bring a different set of observations that add up to the sum total of what's going on. Some investigators are going to miss things other people are going to see. So there can be, when you look at it, you want to look at the totality of data when you're evaluating how you're going to respond. So just because, you may hire your own mold investigator that says, oh, there's no problem, you want to know what your tenant's investigator said to see if it makes sense and to reconcile those things. Okay, so not A versus B, but A plus B. Just remember that in terms of reports. Okay. Other thing on reports is that physical inspections and following the water and looking for moisture and figuring out what's going on, those kind of practical inspection type data points trump samples, okay? Sampling results can be quite variable for mold for a number of reasons, and there can be a lot of variability in the numbers that they produce. So you want to always rely on, I would often say that it's 80–90% the inspection, and the last 10% or less is the sampling data. That being said, there can be some value provided from sampling, but here's what it's not. It's not, hey, is there a mold problem here? I don't know, let's go take an air sample and see. Air samples are really bad for predicting if there's hidden mold. Now, if you think there's mold, you look for mold, you don't see any. You look for moisture, you investigate, you follow the water, you can't find mold anywhere. You can take an air sample to give that last little bit over the line to say, and I don't see anything abnormal in the air samples. So they can supplement around the sides, but the core, the meaty stuff is that inspection and that common sense. Also, when you do investigative reports, you want to document the positive and the negative findings. We talked about this, right? It's not just where the mold is, it's where the mold isn't as well. What was looked at? You want to understand the scope of what was looked at and what was found to be free of issues, as well as where issues were found. Photos, again, I think I talk about these in just about every section in here, because picture tells story, right? So the more photos you have of the findings, when we look at reports with photographs are far more important than informative than reports without them. And it takes a little extra time and money to put photos into a report, but it's probably one of the most valuable things that you get in terms of your investigative process. And finally, when it comes to recommendations, especially on the lower end, the cheaper mold inspections, it'll say things like, hey, mold was found in the living room, remediate the affected area. That's not very specific. You know, what are you paying for? Know from your vendor kind of the depth of what they're going to tell you. Usually it's, hey, clean up X, clean up this area, and chase if additional stuff is found. That's a very common thing. But they should give you that starting point of where to start looking, and kind of put some kind of a box or parameter around the issue that you're dealing with initially, and not just have a generic blanket statement about clean up the mold growth in the room or clean up the mold growth in the house, right? You're paying for some of those specifics. So where and how much, or you should get a sense of what's of that from your specifications for remediation. Okay, let's talk about remediator reports. Sometimes you don't get one, sometimes you just get an invoice, right? But similarly, if you hire a mold remediation contractor, you want some kind of documentation from them about what was done. This is your record about what you paid to have done. It's not just a bill for, hey, this many square feet of removal, but what got removed where. So either a record of that, ideally photos showing what it looked like before they did their work, showing what it looked like as it was being torn apart. So you can see, was there really a bunch of mold behind that drywall that was stained, or did there actually not turn out to be much? Oftentimes that gets lost to history, right? You see, hey, they're staining here, let's take out this wall, remediate, you come back in, half the wall's gone. Was it all covered with mold, or was there like less than a square foot? Someone's got to take a picture, document what happened. Oftentimes your remediators can do that, and you want those for your records, right? That helps inform down the road if there's allegations of things. So, you know, what was there, what was not there, and getting that documentation. That's probably one of the biggest gaps that we see a lot of times in remediation efforts when we're looking after the fact. Occupant communications. Again, I said I'd touch on this, all these different parts. Key thing here is when things are happening, informing them what will be done, what was done, what was found, what's coming up next. What you're doing is you're keeping them engaged on the solution pathway. You don't want to give them radio silence or keep them in the dark. You want to let them know what's happening to the environment around them, when they expect to get back in. Remember, it's a team effort. Everyone has the shared interest to get the environment cleaned up and back to normal. So that's what we see as effective, is keeping them engaged on that solution pathway to recognize we're working this towards an endpoint. Okay, let's get to a quick time check. We're doing pretty good. Let's take a look at the back end, the after situation. So we're wrapping up our incident. What are some tips of what we can do a little bit better then? Well, there's the question of verification. So what work was done? Is it all gone? Going and having a third party or another set of eyes take a look to make sure the scope of what was supposed to be done was completed. Looking up those wall cavities, snooping around, making sure the mold's gone. Don't just take a contractor's word for it. We've seen all kinds of things. Even good meaning contractors occasionally miss something. So another set of eyes to make sure everything looks good, whether that's in-house or from the outside, can go a long way. You also want to make sure that your causes are fixed, right? That whatever caused the moisture to get in, a lot of times we get wrapped up in fixing the damage, cleaning up the mold, and we forget that, oh yeah, something caused this to begin with. Especially, I mean, it's easy if it's a leaking pipe because the water's still coming out. You got to fix the pipe. But if it's something that's seasonal or intermittent, sometimes believe it or not, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle to go get that cause fixed. Or to evaluate, if you think you know what the cause was, to come back and check again to make sure that you were right about it, so you don't end up dealing with another mold issue down the road. And you're basically saying, are conditions acceptable to put this place back together again and get people back in? Are you going to collect samples? Depends on the situation. There's no hard and fast rule that you have to collect samples for remediation efforts, but sometimes people do because they want that extra assurance that when all the moldy mess was made inside the plastic box, that everything was clean before the plastic came down. So you can think about what kind of samples you want to take, and if that's going to provide you with the value, or if you want that extra measure of assurance. Finally, with occupant communication, you want to inform them what was done, how it was taped up, how it was cleaned up. You're giving them the confidence to understand that the issue was properly dealt with. If you've been following the steps along the way, everything should be hunky-dory with the occupant. They know how we're progressing. We're almost there. We're getting it done. We're getting it verified. And it also provides you the opportunity to ask if there's still outstanding concerns, right? Because there's the science, there's the physical component of getting the mold issue cleaned up, and there's the people component. And oftentimes people are ones that complain, that cause worries, that bring up, that file claims and such. And so you want to make sure that their concerns have been addressed, because if you've done if you cleaned up the physical component of what's going on, and you've addressed the concerns and the fears of the occupants, then you've taken care of the issue and put it to rest. So from a risk standpoint, oftentimes I find that really helps, again, keep everyone on the same team, progressing things through to resolution. After tips, consolidating your documentation. When we do litigation and discoveries going on and things are coming and people are scrambling to find stuff, you don't want to be doing this after the fact, calling your remediator. Oh, hey, remember that job from 3 years ago that you did? Do you have any photos of that? Right there, while it's fresh in everyone's mind, consolidate, pull together all of your in-house documentation and ask your vendors for that documentation for them. Dot your I's, cross your T's. Much better to get it now. You got your best odds of getting the data that you need rather than trying to hope it's there down the road. And then finally, as you have incidents, keeping track of the nature of the incidents you have, depending on how large your facility or how many facilities you have, you can start getting trends and spotting common things that are going wrong, which can help guide some preventative actions on knowing how to head them off as they come up. Beyond the incident, you ask the question of, does the same condition exist elsewhere, right? If you have multiple units and there's a leak that occurs in one, you might be able to get ahead of the game by saying, it's the same window. I wonder if that leak is happening in other places. Is this a one-off or a systemic thing? Asking that question is how you can start to get ahead of the game and not fall behind in your responses, and getting back to that before condition. And then obviously you can ask that question about what can you do to prevent it. So if you say, hey, the water bill is extra high the past 2 or 3 months, might be an indication that you had some running water, such as this apartment building owner discovered when they had a tenant that went AWOL on them, but left the hot water in the shower running for 3 months. And that's the condition that unit was in at the end of that 3 months. One of the worst ones that we've ever seen. It sounds funny, but looking at one of those indicators that you can look at, water usage things to catch leaks that are occurring, that kind of stuff, you can start getting creative and getting ahead of the game and catching some issues before you end up with some kind of house of horrors like this. So that was a little bit of having you drink from the fire hose on tips. Hopefully you got some good pointers out. It got your mind thinking. And Sam, if we want to see if anyone's got any questions in there for us, I'm happy to answer some.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ben. So before we start the Q&A session, just a reminder, tomorrow we will be sending out a follow-up email with the link to our YouTube page that will have this recording on it, so you can share it with anyone that you would like, as well as Ben's contact information and a copy of the slides, so you can review that anytime you'd like. But back to the Q&A session. Yes, Ben, we do have a few questions that we look answered. So the first one is, do you have a checklist of items to look for in a classroom, maybe a one-page document to use as an investigation tool, or any other resources that might be helpful?
Yeah, we have, there's various things that we can utilize. And the truth is there are a lot of different checklists. We mostly rely on our experience. But the best resource for something like that, for the classroom was asked about, is the EPA Tools for Schools program. So if you Google EPA Tools for Schools, you're going to get to a set of resources there. And they have a lot of great checklists and stuff. IEQ resources in general from EPA, they have checklists for IEQ that has, organized in many different ways. So that's an awesome resource for getting kind of checklists. Now, I will say this one thing on checklists is, I always like checklists, whether it's for a safety inspection or a mold inspection, is a reminder tool, right? So for your investigators, the checklist is, okay, hey, let's look at this checklist before we go do it, to keep in mind. But when we're walking around, let's put our eyes on the environment. Let's look around so that we can see that out of the box situation that we might otherwise miss. Then go back and review the checklist. You don't want to miss something because you're only looking for what's on the checklist, I guess is the bottom line with that. But take a look at the Tools for Schools thing at EPA. And as Sam said, if there's some additional assistance we can help with, give us a call, and then we can help you tailor something for your outfit.
Great. The next one is, if mold is hidden and covered, example, behind a baseboard, behind a wall, how likely is it to cause health effects? Is it considered okay to leave it if it is well contained?
Okay, so the first answer is, okay, can mold get out from wall cavities and such? Yes, it can. Okay, air can move through wall cavities. Now, not nearly as easily as it can come right off the wall if it's growing on the wall, but it can. What I have seen in practice is, I've seen a lot of mold growth in a wall cavity that really doesn't affect any indoor measures. And I've seen where a relatively modest amount does. I haven't seen tiny amounts affect air quality inside, but it certainly can. Now, hey, if it's glued down behind wallpaper, it's not going to diffuse through the wallpaper, right? What the guidance says, and it's contained in S520 in other places, but the most detailed kind of breakdown on it is in the IICRC S520. And the answer is that mold growth shouldn't be in buildings, and we should clean it up if it's there. Now, there may be some situations where that's not practical or cost prohibitive or other factors, and they line out some criteria about management in place. So management in place is not the preferred option, but it can be an option if you're able to encapsulate it and monitor the situation. So the answer is, sometimes it can and sometimes it can't affect the interior environment, and hence people. And the general preference is, the typical standard of care is to remove it. In special circumstances, looking at those with those caveats, you might be able to manage it in place. But if it's behind baseboard and drywall, that's easy. Pull off the baseboard, cut out the drywall, and replace it. We're talking about kind of more specialized situations where you can. So, but there is a provision for making exceptions. Again, with those check boxes.
Awesome. The next one is, so I have an area with minor water damage staining, circles of different shades on a baseboard, but the moisture meters and infrared camera showed no moisture. Also, there's no odor. Would you say the next step would be to opening up the drywall, or is there another part of the process that we should try?
Yeah, so if you get spots on baseboards, and this happens sometimes, it's like, hey, we know mold when we see it, right? If it's fuzzy enough, you look at it and say, that's mold. And oftentimes remediation, we don't take a bunch of samples to confirm it's mold, because it most obviously is. But you have those situations where you're like, is that mold or is it not? I'm not sure what that is. In those situations, you can take a surface sample to help of that spot to inform you if it's fungal in nature. That's one thing you can do. Another thing that you can do, like if it's on a baseboard, you can try removing the baseboard. Oftentimes, If moisture is coming through a wall, the most likely place it'll be is sandwiched between the baseboard and the drywall, because there's really no air movement to dry that out. But as a first step, I'd pull, if you're really concerned about it, taking off a baseboard and looking behind it's relatively easy. So I'd try that. And then if there's any kind of staining or damage behind that baseboard, either on the drywall or on the baseboard, then I'd consider cutting open the wall and looking. And from a practical standpoint, if your baseboard's tall enough, you can even cut under the line of the baseboard. So you can look in that wall cavity with a camera, with a mirror, see what's going on in there, without having to repaint, retexture. You can kind of do a rough patch and put your baseboard back. So that's how I'd probably handle that. Remembering to always check for your hazardous building materials or take appropriate precautions before you cut that drywall.
Sweet. So the next question we have, Ben, for you is having both the S500 and the S520 worth it for the pre-mold growth situations?
I would say having both of them is worth it. Okay. S500 is dealing with water, right? Before mold grows, how you dry it out and such. And S520 is after you have mold growth. So in the pre-situation, you're applying S500, but S520 is going to dictate to you what you do if you have a mold issue. So if you're going to that next level of managing things in-house or wanting that as a reference, that's kind of after you move to a generalized document like the EPA mold remediation in schools, commercial buildings. The natural next step is to go get the IICRC documents, and that's going to get you into some of the, more of a reference guide and get into the deeper issues on it.
Great. Looks like the next one we have is, what are your thoughts on mold certifications?
With mold certifications, one, there are some jurisdictions that require them. Like if you're in Florida, you're in Texas, other places, they will require anyone holding himself out as a mold investigator to have those certifications. In California, we don't have those. Here's what I have found in that regard. I have seen people that don't have certifications be excellent mold investigators, and I've seen people with certifications that are terrible mold investigators. So I think unless your jurisdiction specifically requires it, I think that having someone that's experienced professionals that they're experienced in doing that type of investigation is the most critical element to look for. It's pretty. I've seen a lot of people that can get that aren't necessarily great at doing mold investigations. So I don't think that, hey, that certification means you're going to get a great one. Even within certified inspectors, there's a huge range in the quality that you get. So I think the driving factor is more the experience of the person, and with that experience coupled with some type of professional certification, whether it be a CIH or a mold specific certification, would be best.
All right. The next one we have is, how much can a bad HVAC system contribute to mold issues?
Well, it can contribute a lot, right? Depending on how bad it is. But HVAC systems typically, if we have a mold issue in an HVAC system, it's usually something associated around the cooling coil, because the cooling coil is where you're generating moisture in the HVAC system, right? So the condensation coming off that pan either get blow through, or moisture, the air velocity is such that's blowing moisture off of that coil onto things downstream, or you're getting leaking coming from the drain pan. That's the most common situation. Other things can be control of humidity and dew point temperatures that can be related to HVAC function. But definitely the thing is, if you have a mold growth issue occurring in the HVAC system, it has the potential to really spread it throughout the building, because it's sucking up and blowing air all throughout, or it can be a conduit sucking it up from one area to another if you have contamination. So in your preventative maintenance programs on the before case, making sure you're doing a good job of regularly servicing and inspecting those HVAC units helps ensure that you catch something before it becomes big people.
Great. So it looks like we have only a few left here, Ben, so we'll try to get through these. Do you have recommended equipment for inspections to be conducted of classrooms, such as specific meters or IR, is there a required training for M&O staff for such equipment?
There's no necessarily required training. Okay, let's back up to the equipment. The question kind of hit on the highlights. What are some of the basic materials to have for a maintenance department? I'd start with moisture meters, okay? And then an IR camera, great toy to have too, as well, can help out, and they're help you spot moisture issues. So looking at those two things, first, what's most important is to read the instructions and understand how the device works. Okay, that's the most critical thing. You can have training for someone that understands how that device works to train people on how to utilize it best. And oftentimes the manufacturer of those will offer courses as well for people to take online or whatever. There are certified thermography courses that you could take as well. You know, there's certification for just about everything now. But the most important thing is using it properly according to the instruction manual. And an easy way might be to take a manufacturer class on how to utilize it.
Great.
But oftentimes we will say that that's how the instrument works. The other component of the training is how you want your teams to use them. And so that's a component of, you know, the training on the device might talk about all the bells and whistles and different things you can do, but you may be using it in a very basic way. So again, in addition to how does the equipment work, it's how do you want to deploy it in your situation at your facility. In terms of specific meters, there's a lot of different ones out there. Some of the most common ones used are, if you look at Delmhorst, Ramex, Protimeter, those are some of the most commonly used ones by investigators. If you're getting one, I would probably use one that's a combined pin meter and surface meter. I have one of each. You know, and if I was buying them all over again, I'd probably get one in the same, so I don't have to carry two things around. But you look at not to disparage any other manufacturers, but I'm just saying those are some of the most common ones that we see.
Great. And it looks like, just due to time, this will be our last one. Any other questions that we haven't been able to answer, Ben, I'll shoot you an email afterwards, and then we can go through those. Have you seen any building designs or maintenance issues that could contribute to moisture problems?
Certainly. There's an entire industry of construction defect litigation that can get into moisture issues. So yeah, I mean, there's, if we talk about and what was the question? Building design, and what was the other part, Sam?
Have you seen any building designs or maintenance issues?
Okay, maintenance issues. Yeah. Okay. So you know, on the building design thing, there's various components of a building that are designed to keep moisture out. Right. Let's put plumbing aside. Right. That if the plumbing is leaking, but you know, around windows, flashings, waterproofing, sloping. I mean, any number of issues can affect buildings. And if those EPA checklists will talk about a lot of exterior building things to look for, keeping rain gutters so they're draining away from the building, etc. Things like that. So most certainly those dynamics, and oftentimes the trickier ones are how the building envelopes allow moisture vapor to get in, and how it manages moisture vapor can be an issue as well. And maintenance practices, certainly, you have to maintain those envelope systems. So if caulking, let's see a common one in schools. Sounds like we have a lot of schools directed ones. You have portable classrooms, right, or modular classrooms. I don't know how portable they are. They can be ported, but you know, they're not a mobile home, right, or a motor home. So those modular buildings, oftentimes some of the waterproofing, what makes them a little cheaper and, you know, more economical is, you know, instead of complex flashing systems, they'll put some caulk on a joint. And so if that caulk cracks, you know, or isn't pliable anymore, then that's a place water can get in. So maintaining those systems and maintaining the roof, for example, that's another simple one, helps keep water out. So most certainly those maintenance practices. Other practical things, custodial carpet cleaning. It's a wet process, right? So if custodian uses too much water or is in a rush in summertime before classes start, and they're blowing and going, clean the room, carpet's all wet, maybe they used a little too much moisture and that carpet was getting cleaned. It's August, it's like 100 degrees outside, you know, high humidity. They clean the room, close the door, move to the next one. Well, you got a wet carpet sitting in there. How's it going to dry? Right. So that's how that kind of custodial practice can affect things. And then cleaning as well. Windows, let's use an example of a residential. If from a maintenance practice, from a homeowner maintenance practice, if you don't clean the grout in your shower and clean the organic material that builds up there, if you don't clean your windowsill tracks or open your windows and ventilate things, you can allow organic material to build up, and you can allow condensation, which gets that organic material wet and causes mold growth, like mold on the ceiling of a shower or in a windowsill track. So certainly those maintenance practices can affect it.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you everyone too for all your questions. And like we said, the ones that we couldn't get to today, you'll hear from us soon, maybe by early next week, to those questions. And thank you again for attending, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.